Hello, and welcome to the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion's eighth conversation in its series of online conversations titled Engaged, Religion and the Common Good. I am Asma El Mesnawi, Program Manager of the Ansari Institute, and today I will try to engage two guests with different yet overlapping global experiences on our topics of interest. And the overlap comes from the fact that both have been students of the Master of Global Affairs at Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. The aim of the conversation is to hear from their personal experiences and learn from their perspectives. How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect the educational system, the religious, spiritual, and overall well-being of students worldwide, and international students in the US in particular, among other currently relevant topics? So first, I would like to welcome Seiko Kanda, who is joining us from Chiba, Japan. Seiko is a 2020 graduate of the Master of Global Affairs at the Keough School. Before joining the program, Seiko studied Spanish and Global Studies at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies in Japan. As a recipient of the Mexico-Japan government's Strategic Partnership Program scholarship, he also studied at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México in Mexico City. He worked for 2 years as a treasury and market specialist at MUFG Bank in Mexico, while volunteering at a local nonprofit organization that served homeless at-risk adolescents. He is fluent in Japanese and Spanish. Seiko's research interests include Latin American religion and society, the religious and ideological underpinnings of socially oriented activities, and multinational collaborative efforts pertaining to economic development. He is the recipient of an Ansari Institute Fellowship. And from Boston, I would like to welcome John Bosco Lugunja from Uganda, a current student of the Master of International Peace Studies at the Keough School. John is a Catholic priest ordained by the Diocese of Kasana Luweero. He is passionate about promoting sustainable peace and justice in society. He recently worked in the Diocesan Peace and Justice Department and as director of a graduate school. He also has served as pastor and associate pastor and has ministered to a wide range of people, including Rwandan and South Sudanese refugees, displaced peoples, and people in poverty. He holds an MA in theology from Makerere University and BA degrees in philosophy and theology from Pontifical Urban University in Rome. John Bosco is also a recipient of the Ansari Institute Fellowship. Welcome to both of you, John Bosco and Seiko.
Thank you, Asma. Well, thank you for the invitation.
How are you guys doing? How are you, Seiko?
I'm doing good. I'm now back in Japan. So upon our arrival, we have to spend 2 weeks of self-quarantine time, and we finished with it. So now we finally get to, interact with the family.
Well, that's really nice. How are you doing where you are?
I'm doing quite well. After the semester and a long time on Zoom lectures, I decided to visit my friends and family in Boston. I'm doing well, thank you.
Great, great. So my first question to both of you is, can you talk to me a little bit about what motivated you to join Keough School of Global Affairs, and how has your learning journey there been so far? And any of you could start, of course.
You want to start, John Bosco?
Good to start. Thank you for good invitation and for introduction. As already mentioned, I'm a Catholic priest. I was born in Luweero, and this is where the civil war which brought the government of President Museveni, who has been a president for over 35 years in Uganda, where it was fought. And as you know, when the civil war takes place, some people are collaborators of the government and others of the rebel groups. And happened that my father was in the government and did not welcome this kind of war. So as in people engaged in the war, they felt like our family and other people had betrayed them. So they decided to raid our family. So, and my father was affected and was shot. All the family was devastated, and we lived by this throughout my life. And we knew, with the civil war, it is easy to identify. The other family supports the rebels, this family doesn't. So through that, I became a priest and working among the refugees from Rwanda and Southern Sudan, and being assistant director in Peace and Justice Commission, I felt that it is worth for me to get skills to be a peace builder. After becoming a priest, I served these capacities, but I never attended school like a kiosk school. So I felt that it was incumbent upon me to look for a school which can equip me with the skills and promote peace and justice. And I found kiosk school particularly so speaking to me, and that's the way I came to Notre Dame. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John Bosco. That's really an inspirational story for why and what motivated you to come to the University of Notre Dame. And what about you, Psycho?
Yeah, for me, I think there were two big reasons that I wanted to join Kiosk School of Global Affairs. One is that I was very interested in international development career and religious studies and Latin American studies. And I didn't have clear idea what I want to do with these interests, but I thought that Kiosk School is the best place to learn the combination of these three areas of studies. And the other reason is that my wife started her master program in Notre Dame first, so I wanted to join her.
Well, that's great. Well, Seiko, your cohort couldn't be part of a full-scale graduation ceremony, and John Bosco was not able to do his 6-month international internship in South Africa. That is the flagship experience of the Peace Studies program because of the COVID-19 circumstances. And as he told me before we started the interview, he will be doing it in DC instead with a different organization. So can you talk to me about how did you cope with the fast escalation of events as a consequence of this global pandemic and the way it affected your life and your educational experiences? I think I should mention that I graduated 1 year before Seiko, and I just can't imagine how your experiences have been different from mine.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think personally, I think being online student was not so much challenging and very difficult as it was more provocative and a kind of thought-provoking experience. I'm sure John Bosco's experience in Kiosk School is way more affected by pandemic than mine because it's the ongoing challenge as you go about your summer internship and so on. And I say this because I believe that this experience of in the time of pandemic has been very different and diverse depending on the situation in which each individual finds oneself. So for me, I think it's more about time to really reflect on the meaning of it, and it really requires a lot of imagination and actually reaching out to the people in need in this time. So I think, yeah, maybe John Bosco, you can bring more perspective to that.
Thank you. To me, it was kind of challenging situation because it was the first of that kind to have online classes. So I had several Zoom conversations, but seriously engaged in class. This was my first time, and it was a learning experience for both the students and teachers. I remember the university gave us 1 week to get acquainted with the presentation and teaching and so on. So, and the classes were really going on. So it was a kind of a challenging moment, learning all these virtual raising of hands, presentation, missing the cohort, and I was processing my visa to go to South Africa. So it was kind of a challenging moment. However, it was kind of teaching that things can be done virtual. So I think it was both affected negatively, but also positively. We learned how to work on through internet, which is I think this is the trend we are now heading to. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. So now let's talk about something else. A concept that is extremely important and widely discussed at the University of Notre Dame, and particularly the Kyiv School, throughout the year. And I think you know what I'm talking about. The concept of integral human development. And I think it's of more importance and more relevance these days due to the toll that the pandemic had on human life in all its aspects. So, integral human development, for those who don't know it, is part of Catholic social teaching. And I would like to ask you, Seiko and John Bosco, about your take on that. Do you think it is something that was or is missing or needed? Does it have any potential to bring change whatsoever to the conversation and the practice of international development and global affairs?
Yeah, um, I think it is a very helpful concept, especially for someone like me who comes from Protestant tradition. So there is the idea of holistic mission or integral mission in the original language, Spanish, misión integral, which may be the kind of equivalent of Catholic social teaching in Protestant churches, but it is not as widely accepted or discussed as Catholic social teaching among practitioners in development works. And I think Catholic social teaching is helpful, especially as it provides rationale to value every and whole person when it talks about human dignity. But I want to highlight that it also really helps us, this focus on every and whole person, help us to understand human desire that we believe that each individual has. Like everyone wants to be loved, everyone wants to be accepted as who she is and who he is, and live with dignity in all aspects of one's life. And I think this understanding of every human's desire to be accepted and respected and loved allows us to capture kind of another dimension of development works and humanitarian works. I was thinking, kind of over the 2 years of program, I was thinking about this, but because of this holistic understanding of human dignity that not only sees the people in obvious need, but also it explains why people should and how people should engage with the lives of people in need. So, for example,
Hmm.
MGA student, I often kind of struggle in articulating the reason that I want to engage in development jobs.
Hmm.
Like for example, when I would say that I'm interested in working in nonprofit, some people tended to say, "Oh, you're a good person. You want to do for other people, instead of making money for yourself and so on." And that was very troubling for me because I know that the purpose of my desire to engage in development is not because of any heroic reason, but I myself want to do something. I need to fulfill my desire as an individual who want to flourish in my life. So this is where the idea of accomplishment can be very helpful. We are not just helping or empowering people in need, but we recognize the challenges in humanity and we live together accompanying others and being accompanied by others. And this process also shaped by and enriched by our profound desire to be, accepted and affirmed and loved, which Catholic social teaching, I think, affirms as an essential aspect of human being. So this is something, sorry, I think I appreciate about, and also something that I think we could talk more about.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this interesting perspective on integral human development, Pico. And I think, like the last thing that you mentioned, that Catholic social teaching came to affirm it instead of bringing it as something new. Because I think people from other traditions sometimes tend to be sensitive hearing that, oh, integral human development is part of Catholic social teaching, as if it wasn't rooted in other traditions. So it's an affirmation of the holistic approach to development of the whole person. Thank you for that. So what do you think about that, John Bosco, as
Coming from
a Catholic priest?
thank you. Coming from the Catholic tradition, I think, as Saiko has mentioned, this is affirmation of what is. So every person was created in the image and likeness of God. So everybody has this dignity which must be respected. And when it affirms human flourishing, we really articulate what is. And when we look at the condition, humanizing conditions, when we look at the abortions, mistreatment, treating people as means, not as ends. So I think this is an important point to speak about at this particular time. That wait, whatever we do, whatever we speak, maybe whatever we engage into, a person must be at the center of every activity. So when we look at wars, when we look at all conflicts, we ask ourselves, where do we put the human dignity? How do we respect this? So I think Kio School has very important element to offer. And to any tradition, we must uphold this and must really fight and say, whatever we do, whatever we say, we must put a person at the center of every activity.
Thank you so much, John. Now, both of you, as I mentioned before in the introduction, are recipients of the Ansari Institute Fellowship. And one of the reasons behind that is your interest in global engagement with religion, which is a central theme to the Ansari's mission. So I want to explore with you and that theme and that topic, and I would like for us to talk specifically about the engagement of religious actors and faith-based organizations as spiritual and social service providers, especially during the current pandemic crisis. So the media has covered on several instances pastors and preachers who insisted on continuing with their congregational prayers, framing it as a practice that put the lives of their followers at risk. The media has also covered stories where faith-based organizations intensified their operations or even emerged because of the crisis to provide food and help to vulnerable individuals and communities. So, Seiko and John Bosco, how do you see or how do you assess the engagement of religious actors and organizations in promoting the common good? And what do you think of the media coverage of that?
Yeah, about the media coverage, well, when it comes to the roles of religion in today's society, I think that media tends to fail to capture the multidimensionality of religions, and often they are not very sensitive enough to the elusiveness of the concept of religions, which leads to the underappreciation of the aspects of human lives that I believe have a lot to do with religions and religious worldviews. Well, I think I'm a little bit biased because I'm speaking from my own context of my home country, Japan, where more than 60% of the population identify themselves as non-religious, mainly due to the fear and kind of hatred against the religious organizations that caused friction with the society in 1980s and 90s, kind of organization that is considered as cult from the general public. So people's understanding of religion in general is quite limited to certain types of religion and certain aspects of religion. So people generally think that religion is something kind of enigmatic, unreliable, that something you have to keep a distance from. And the many ways that media portray religion in Japan perpetuate this very one-dimensional understanding of religion. So I'm not saying that media should not feature these extreme cases, for example, of religious leaders who seem to go against social norms, ignore scientific cautions about this pandemic. But I think it is important that people know these cases. But I think that these caricature should not dominate people's understanding of what religion can be, especially in this time in which people really need holistic and spiritual wisdom and guidance in life. That was kind of my first reaction to the question.
And do you see that changing in like media in Japanese society and the Japanese media. I mean, 60% are identify as irreligious. So, like currently, is that changing? Is the media coverage of religion changing? Like, what can you say about that?
Yeah, I can't speak with the kind of specific statistic and so on. But I do think that, now is the time, especially in this time of pandemic, I think people need more guidance, as I said. What I mean is that I think this is a time when the social consequences of our decisions before us is becoming clearer. For example, like younger, healthy generation like me, for example, if I go outside, unnecessarily visit to the public space without putting mask on could put someone else's life in danger.
Mm.
And if I even choose to stay at home and limiting to conversation or human interaction to the online Zoom, well, I think what I want to say is that, the social consequences of your decision is greater. And you have to ask some questions like, why do I have to care about the lives of people who may have nothing to do with you? And in this time, we have to ask them some guidance about that help us to make decision each day about our values. And even if you choose to stay home, what I want to say was, in limiting conversation to online, I think you can benefit from asking these questions about your inner desire to be accepted and respected and loved in this very difficult time, and prioritize some relationship over others. And we need some more deeper sense of wisdom in this time. So I think, the importance of religion is even greater now, while it's not very simple. And I think that is also the case in Japan as well, and many people looking for something that is guiding, that provides kind of guiding principle of life.
Thank you, Tiku. What do you think about that, John Bosco?
Well, I'm a bit lucky or unlucky. I come from, my father is a Protestant and my mother is a Catholic. So coming from that perspective, and but in Uganda, I would say that initially even the intermarriages were difficult between religions. So if somebody is a Catholic, was encouraged to go to the Catholic school to marry a Catholic person. If you're Muslim, it's more like that. Or if you get married to a Muslim or to a Catholic, sometimes you are forced to change your religion. So for me, being a member of Ansari, of global engagement with the religions, I think it speaks much to me. But again, what I would like to mention at this point, that man is both physical and spiritual being. So these parts, this physical and spiritual part of a human person, should be really given due respect and whatever it takes. So as we look at the religion, it takes care of spiritual nourishment. It brings about hope, faith, solidarity. And we see when people are void of this spiritual nourishment, we see what takes place. Some people have wealth, some people have whatever they have engaged in, but when they don't care about their souls, there is a vacuum. And at this particular time of COVID, when people are locked down, even when they don't have food, they are looking for something like hope, something like faith, something like a solidarity. At this particular time, I think the media should be able to articulate these points, to stress the need of religion. Because when we care about the physical part of a person and forget the spiritual, we have this vacuum which is not filled. So I think religion at this particular time is very important. However, I would like to mention that all God has blessed us with the knowledge and the prudence. Whatever we must do, it should be guided by the prudence we have, by the knowledge we have. As we engage in spiritual nourishment, hope, and solidarity, we must take cautious of this pandemic. So I would think that as we do this, we should devise means probably through online masses, online services, and obey the social distancing. So as we engage into all these aspects, I think it is also important to include that aspect of prudence, whereby we don't bring more harm than good. Because if we have all the congregations gathered around, some are infected, some are not. So the chances are high that the whole community is going to be affected. So I would like to say that as we engage into nourishment, hope, and solidarity, the aspect of prudence should speak louder and to help to guide the people and also to lead them into good life.
Thank you for that, John Bosco. And a follow-up question on that: how do you assess, like, the Ugandan response, like the public's response, the media's response, or the government response to the pandemic? Like, how did people deal with this and with their public religious practices? Were they on the obedient side? Was it something in between? Did people still attend churches? And how is Uganda doing in that regard?
As I mentioned earlier, our president has been in power for over 30 years. And when this pandemic in March was pronounced, he took everything by himself. So he's the person to pronounce all the restrictions. So they closed all the borders, they suspended all the public gatherings, the religious gatherings, and everything. And he suspended every person who could engage in relief. So he said whatever must be done should be done by the government. The religious organizations, the humanitarian organization, we are suspended from the work. So what we saw a totalitarian government having everything at their disposal to do the humanitarian activities. And even the president said that if you have any relief, take to the government. And some of the governments in Africa, they are corrupt. And what we have seen, that whatever people have collected has been embezzled publicly. People have received spoiled food. People have not been engaged. The religious organization, first, they could not even give relief. They could not even preach. Like the internet in Africa is not accessible. Even some people don't have the radios and TVs to listen to masses. So it was kind of a mess. Until of recent that the religious organization approached the president and said, look here, we see our people are suffering, we cannot look on. So that's when last he allowed them to give relief services. So I think in Africa they are more affected than here, because people don't have radios, they don't have TVs, they don't have phones, they don't have internet. And I want to assume or to think that the effect is going to be more in Africa than elsewhere. We see cases of suicide, we see cases of domestic violence, people are dying of hunger, the religious people cannot approach them. So it's kind of a nasty experience in Africa. And I think we pray that probably God intervenes supernaturally, that this pandemic ends and the religious organization can go to be near to the people, to nourish them, to give them hope and that kind of solidarity they need.
Thank you so much for that, John Bosco. Another question that came to me is, how do you imagine the future or the after COVID-19 pandemic? And I'm talking here about like the practice and the engagement of people with the religion in public space. How do you imagine that happening after COVID-19? Will the pandemic affect that, or would people just go back to their old normal? What do you think about that, Sika?
Yeah, I think many religious leaders now are facing these questions in this pandemic. What it really means to have in-person congregation or in-person assemblies, as opposed to online separated at home congregation. In Japan now, it's kind of going back to the way we used to have the congregation now, but still we are doing very different ways. For example, we are still limiting the number of people that can gather at the same time. So, for example, in my church, We used to have a congregation of 50, 60 people one time a day on Sunday, but now they limit splitting into three, so there are three service per day, and limiting the number of people below 10. But that that is a kind of additional work for, of course, those who are organizing these congregations. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to be completely the same as it used to be, but there are a lot of combination of these new technology that they got to explore a little bit in this time pandemic, and the kind of course, but we do need to some extent the actual space in which we can share time and space in terms of having religious worship, religious congregation. And I think we are now looking at these changes now. So yeah, I can't predict, but that's what's happening in Japan.
Hmm. How about Uganda, John Bosco? What do you think? Is COVID-19 going to be the new normal, or things will go back to their old ways?
I should mention that things will never be the same again because, like as we go on, when the restrictions are being lifted, there is this kind of suspicion. You are not sure who is safe and who is not. So I think as we go back to normal life, things will go on slowly by slowly, and we cannot be the same as we were. But at the same time, I would like to think that now we need more engagement with the religions, because we have now the pandemic has taught us in more probably rude way that we need solidarity. We need consideration of the weak, of the poor, of those vulnerable. I think at this time again, after the pandemic, we need more engagement with other religions to come out with the solid situation which can help our people, which can edify our people, which can increase hope, than like concentrating on what divides us than what makes us together and to move on. So I think at this particular time, I think also the Ansari has a great work to do for us to see how this religious organization come together more and see forge a way forward on how we should live our life with hope and love.
Thank you so much, John Bosco. Well, we hope, the Ansari Institute will be up to the task, and we will hopefully contribute something positive to the conversation and the practice of positive and, or rather, the display of the positive engagement of religion that's been happening around the world. So we'll move to a parallel topic, and of course, you must be following the news of the protests that spread all across the US after the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police, and the conversation about racism, police brutality, and social justice that has been sparked because of that. No, not only in the States, but in many areas around the world. So I'd like to hear from both of you what you think of that, and how do you see racism playing out in your own society? How different it is from what is happening in the United States, if there's any difference.
Yeah. So to be honest, my first reaction was that I did not know the history of the racism and police brutality in the U.S. Definitely not enough to even imagine the depths of the pain of the people of color have been through. And also, I did not know how difficult it has been, this systemic injustice to be changed or to be improved despite the years and years of efforts to do so. So the past few weeks have been, for me, a time to educate myself and bring the issues to the table of conversation with different people. And answering to your question about my home country, I do see the racism in Japan, but maybe generally more in hidden ways, subtle ways, particularly the racism against East Asian minorities. For example, Japanese, Korean, or Korean residents in Japan is more complicated and not visible sometimes because it is not obvious by appearance sometimes who is Japanese, who is Korean. Um, so, for example, my grandparents of my father's side, they were originally from South Korea, but they received education in Japanese in Korea because at that time Korea was colonized by Japan. I'm talking about before World War II, and they had to move to Japan. And as they settled in, they changed the family name from Korean name to Japanese name. They changed nationality to Japanese, and they never taught Korean language to their kids in order to avoid discrimination in Japanese society. So my dad, he grew up with the Japanese identity completely, and I never thought of him as ethnically Korean to the extent that I myself it never occurred to me that I am ethnically half Korean until I was my first year of college. And actually, when I realized that I wanted to learn Korean culture and Korean language, so I did in my college. And I went to see my grandmother, and I was excited to tell her that now I started learning your language, and I want to say I wish I can talk with you, kind of naively hoping that she would be very happy with it. But when I said it, she was kind of a little bit surprised and perplexed, and she said to me, "Oh, Seiko, you don't have to, you don't need to." And I learned that she still thinks that having a tiny bit of Korean identity makes my life difficult in Japan. And that was a very sad and kind of shocking moment for me. So there has been, and there is racism in Japan. I'm talking about this racism against East Asian minorities. But you need sometimes great amount of imagination of the life of oppressed and marginalized, because in many cases, these racism is not visible in terms of that many people try to hide their identity because of the oppression.
Thank you, Seiko, for that. And what about Black people in Japan? Is racism against them something that exists? And how does that play out in the Japanese society?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely there exists racism against foreigners in general, and also especially people of color. But I think it's slightly different because still, Japan is changing a lot, but still quite homogenous country, and oftentimes people recognize foreigners as a one set, and it doesn't matter much whether it's black or white. Of course, there's a lot of difference with the way people react to the people of color, but it's not necessarily very visible in a way that we see in US. But I have a lot of friends of color in Japan, and they do feel sometimes kind of look at from kind of different kind of they receive a different kind of reaction from people, assume that they don't speak Japanese even they do, and all that kind of subconscious sometimes assumption among Japanese population in general is still pervasive. And
yeah, please go ahead.
No, yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's so interesting because what you mentioned, like racism, that categorizes people between as nationals versus foreigners, is something that we also have in Morocco.
Yeah.
So, like a Black person from Morocco, if you are a Black person from Morocco, probably people, they won't see your color or won't. There might be, of course, subtle racism, but it won't be as much as a person who's, say, from another sub-Saharan country, for example. And again, because of that dichotomy of like a foreigner, a non-Moroccan versus a Moroccan, and like other factors that also play out in making racism something that's a bit different from what is like systemic racism in the United States. So, John Bosco, what do you think of that, and how is there racism in Uganda, and how? Well, first of all, what do you think of what's happening in the United States, and can we talk about racism in Uganda? If it exists, how does it look like?
I really love the definition of racism by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I quote, they say, Racism arises when, either consciously or unconsciously, a person holds that his or her own race or ethnicity is superior, and therefore judges persons of the other races or ethnicities as inferior and unworthy of equal regard. End of quote. In this definition, we see that it's either consciously or unconsciously. And this is what we carry in our hearts, even when, without knowing, somebody regards the other person as inferior and therefore is not qualified to receive the same services. And when we look at maybe the airports and everything, this have gone through. When you see a black person or somebody maybe is a Muslim, the scrutiny they go through is more rigorous than other people. And this is kind of treatment which is not equal to the other person. And when you come to Africa, when we see a person with a white color, this treated as kings, as queens. So they are given a lot of respect. So when it comes, everybody has to vacate. Somebody must be given good food, good attention, sitting well, and it's the treatment varies. And when you see somebody with a color, not with a color, and this is when we look at this definition, this kind of racism. I don't say that we should not treat visitors with due respect, but there is kind of way a special treatment which is given. And when we come to America for the last couple of weeks, I think this is what it is this is just maybe ice drop in a big sea. People are going through a lot of mistreatment. People are not regarded with equal respect. So I think we should be really conscious of what we must do and what we must not do. And in Africa, this, as I have mentioned, it's not also limited to the race, but also ethnicity. There are some ethnic groups in Uganda we consider inferior. So when somebody says, which ethnic group are you from? No, nothing good comes from this region. So we see this kind of disparities where they treat people with different regard. And I think it cuts across. In America, I can say it is severe and more vivid, even in legal affairs, in everything. But also we can see in other countries. But also Notre Dame is not exonerated from this. I think we have so many things we must engage into, we must encourage so that we can fight against racism.
Yeah, thank you so much for these beautiful insights, John Bosco. And it's so interesting what you mentioned about this differential of treatment that somehow pertains to racism in a subtle way. That, like, what Africans in general do and the way they treat foreigners, especially if they are of like fairer skin or like of Europe, coming from Europe or the US, and like that, the high regard and the way they treat them, that's sometimes way better than the way they treat a local. Like me being a Moroccan, coming with a like a European to a vendor on the street or something, they would pay them more attention. And you would think that there's an economic factor there because they're tourists and all that, but there's also the race factor and the colonialist factor, because a lot of those things are inculcated in all of us through this global culture in ways that we don't how to say it, we don't realize at the moment, and it takes time to analyze and like uproot them. So thank you for that. And I think finally my last question will be like directed to you personally. How do you keep engaged with your own faith during these challenging times? Was there a change at that level from before then the pandemic and its imposed new normal?
Yeah. Now that I'm back in Japan, and the fact that we are not able to have the same in-person congregation at church or in-person connection with friends who share Christian faith in my case. And I think this signifies a lot in terms of how I keep engaged with my own faith. This is because now more than ever, we all ask ourselves what it means to be Christian in this time and place. And I think we do need to ask this question as a community and not separately. Of course, there are many people, many vocal people talking about their reflection and outputs, and we can listen to that, or watch that, or we can read that. But I feel that there's a need to have this conversation of what it means to Christian today in Japan, because this ongoing conversation does shape our communal engagement in the local community or even wider society that are constantly changing. So I I do want to, I try to have conversation with my families, extended families, with friends, but it's always kind of limited. So that is kind of my challenge. But I want to kind of extend this community of talking about the meaning of having certain faith in this time and in a space.
And is it happening at any formal institutional level, meaning the pastor or the priest at your church? Do you think they're discussing those things with their congregations?
Yeah,
Like,
I think, yeah, there are many, for example, yeah, many initiatives to have panel discussion and conversation are going on. But at the same time, many religious leaders are very tired and just exhausted by taking care of their own congregation, especially for those people who live by themselves.
mm,
As I said again, the experience of this time of pandemic is very diverse and different depending on each individual and the situation in which each individual finds oneself. And some people need extra care, as John Bosco said, not only physically but spiritually. So kind of, yeah, it's now not everyone can do that, but it is happening.
yeah. Thank you, Seiko. What do you think, or how do you engage, or you keep engaging with your religion, John Bosco, under the pandemic circumstances?
I think for me personally, this time has been of deeper reflection. When we see life has been in normal and interacting with friends, and time comes that you can't move freely, and we ask about the meaning of life, the trust and the hope we must have. But also, it has been a time for me for deep prayer and Bible reading, trying to reflect about the meaning of life. And I think, but also online masses and services, preaching. People have tried to engage into this kind of preaching online. If you go to Facebook or some other media websites, you find a lot of reflections. So to me, well, also I've been uh, doing online masses, and people from South Bend have been following from St. John Baptist Catholic Church. So we have kept on like connected to the people. But at the same time, I want to say that this kind of, as Sheikh has already said, this is a deeper reflection of how we must treat other people, how we must engage into with other people, and how we must see ourselves, but also in the family basis. And I think people have been encouraged that church is not a building, but where people meet and reflect about probably the Quran or the Bible. And people have been encouraged that make your house a house of prayer more than ever before. That you have your family members come together and pray. So I think this is a moment for us to really see how we can be a good Christian, a good Muslim, a religious person, and how we can really engage into the conversation of religious engagement.
Mm. Well, thank you, John Bosco, and thank you both of you for these beautiful insights and this informative and pleasant conversation, for your time and and I hope that this pandemic will be over soon and we will go back to our lives with in better condition, with the revived hope and revitalized spirituality. And with this, I would like to finish our conversation. So thank you, and to all our viewers.